What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Titus, joined, as always, by Mr. Latin himself. How's it going?
Or almost always. It is going pretty good.
And we're also joined today by Kimberly Kirtz. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So Drew sent me a WhatsApp message before we started recording and said, please acknowledge my beautiful background and globe. So here we go. Acknowledge. So
makes my head look small.
If you're not watching this, we are on YouTube now. See how I transitioned right into an advertisement of our new YouTube channel. Yeah, we have video and we are on YouTube, and we also embed these videos on Facebook. So make sure to go check that out if you're still listening instead of watching, although I never watch podcasts. So if you're like me and any other, I was going to say sane person, but I'm trying to get us video watchers and I'm insulting them.
This is not your greatest intro ever, Titus, but we'll let it be.
It definitely, if I use something to segue into literally trying to get us video watchers, and then I insult everyone who watches podcasts via video.
Well done, sir.
So there you go. That's why we're not Joe Rogan yet. We don't quite have those. We don't quite have the skills. Anyways, Kimberly is from DC, and I got to know her first through Followers the Way Richmond. Which interestingly, we might be joining. We are in the process of leaving our church. So I'll throw that out there. And it's actually, it's not something I take loosely. Like I don't like to think of myself as a church hopper. Although growing up, I really heard a lot of bad things about switching churches and church hopping. And then recently I thought of it, like a lot of the friends I have now don't really seem to think that it's as much of a negative thing. What do you think about it, Drew? Like, is there something inherently wrong with someone who changes churches a lot?
Well, I'm the pastor of a church that regularly has people coming and going. Sometimes we feel like a bit of a revolving door. So I'm contractually obligated to say, no, never leave your church unless it's to come join our church. I actually think there are so many reasons that people come up with leaving a church, right? Sometimes it's practical, sometimes it's theological, sometimes it's style, sometimes they're good reasons, sometimes they're stupid reasons, on and on. But I do think in my experience, people do tend to leave churches far too easily. But
okay, so the reason why we're leaving our current church, which shall not be named, I kind of break them down into three categories. First of all, it's like 25% or so of the members seem to be really passionate about knowing God and making Him known. And the other 75% seem to be really passionate about their careers and their hobbies. So there's me being really judgmental. But I just don't think that the church services, and this would be my second complaint, are really set up in a way that is going to change that. Like, it's really easy to come to church and sing a couple songs, early 2000 worship songs, which I'm getting kind of tired of, and listen to
some pretty dank
pastor
songs back then.
Yeah,
Shout
actually,
to the Lord.
I like the really like right before Shout to the Lord, the era before that. I'm trying to think of some of the like songs from that era. I really like that. Like Holiness is What I Long For. That's before Shout to the Lord, right?
Yeah, not very musically strong though.
Oh, it's such a good song. Anyways, what was I saying? It's really easy to come to a lot of churches, and even though our pastors are very passionate about the kingdom and they preach hard-hitting sermons about full surrender to the Lord and all of that, there's not really any accountability after the fact. So you can go and feel really challenged and convicted and then go back and live your life the way you've been living it.
Well, Titus, we actually had a listener ask us about this after our last episode with your brother, I think, and they said, "So what are you supposed to do if you don't have like people who are passionately committed to living out mere devotion and all that? Do you just leave the church?" And I didn't answer him because it's been a really busy week. But what do you think? What does Kimberly think? How would you answer that listener's question?
Oh yeah, I did respond to that comment a few days after he made the comment. Kimberly, you can chime in here anytime you want, by the way. And we will be getting to Kimberly in a bit here, and she's going to be sharing her testimony, so we will let her speak. But I don't really know. What I said in response to that question was it's basically different in every situation, so I gave him a non-answer.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
that's really true though, because some people are leaving because, like, some people are called to, be the fire within their congregation sometimes, and other people are not. And sometimes it depends on what does that congregation need, and is it someone to be a catalyst, or is it for them to not be a thing? It just depends. You can't really know.
Yeah, well, it's as old as the religious history of the United States, where you had the Puritans and the Separatists in the Church of England, right? And so the Puritans were actually the ones who sailed across the ocean to set up colonies for religious freedom. At least that's the way history I got. And but they were actually the ones saying, we're going to purify within the church, even though they moved across the ocean to do it. And then you had the Separatists who said, no, that the church is so far gone. The Church of England is so far gone, we have to separate from them. And frankly, I don't really like either solution, either being this Jeremiah figure screaming at everybody, or cutting yourself off and saying, I alone am left.
So you would like to do what my pastor's doing, which is just kind of gently try to lead people toward a more radical faith, but not push them too much because you have the gift of mercy. Is that what you're saying?
That probably fits me a bit better than I'd care to admit.
I get that. And I think that comes down to personality and giftings within the church, but I get it. I'm not as much like that, and so this could be a biased perspective, but I do think there comes a point when the definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting different results. And so, like,
it's not doing the same thing twice; it's doing the same thing over and over and over again, and that's the difference between you and me.
Nice.
Yeah, you capitalized on my misspeaking there. I'm not sure that our church is ever going to do anything different, and it might, but I just got to the point where I'm like, I think it's actually getting worse. Like, I think we're just having a lot of, people coming from conservative Mennonite churches who want a slightly more liberal church, and that's why they're joining. And if any of you are listening, God bless you. So, we've been driving an hour now to Richmond, and attending the church that Kimberly's a part of, which is actually affiliated with Followers the Way, Boston. And a couple episodes back, we had my brother Tim on, who was singing the praises of Followers the Way. So after listening to that episode, I decided we should join Followers the Way. No, this was before then. It is really interesting, though, that my brother and I are joining churches that are part of the same network, or potentially joining. But yeah, we've been attending, and there's this thing called the spiritual assessment, which is 20 or 30 questions, maybe more than that, I don't know, about everything.
Extra ones for you.
Everything you can possibly think of. So we're actually going to be spiritually assessed starting next month. We're recording this in December. This episode will probably release in January, so by the time it releases, the world will be back to normal. I have high hopes of 2021, by the way. So we'll see how that goes. Brenda and I are not as conservative as at least mainstream Followers of the Way Boston. So at some point in the spiritual assessment, we might just be kicked out the door. So that might happen, but I'm really hoping for better results. So we'll keep the podcast audience updated, and if you don't hear anything, maybe it didn't work out, because that'd be a little awkward.
I was going to say,
no.
you're kind of putting yourself out there. People are going to be waiting for those test results.
Well, here's the deal: like people, I'm sure people listening to this are going through similar situations, and I'm not a big fan of like being hush hush. Like my life's kind of an open book, so that's why I decided to
Start
share
a podcast.
this, sharing our journey.
I want to hear from Kimberly now, Titus.
Yeah, Kimberly. Met Kimberly about a year ago, and been getting to know her. She was actually at our place recently, playing some Monopoly, in which she had a real streak of luck at the end, and that's the only way she beat me.
But other than that, we'll go with it.
So yeah, I wanted to have Kimberly on to kind of share her testimony. You told me recently, Kimberly, that you've only been a committed Christian for about 3 years. So I don't know what you were before then, but I know that you grew up agnostic. So let's start there. Maybe share a little bit about your family background, and when you first started getting interested in Christianity in general.
Yeah. Growing up, I guess my family wouldn't have identified as really anything. We live right on that kind of border between the North and the South. And so being on the southern part of that border, it feels like Christianity is just kind of present. For the most part, like you go to church a couple times and, you like, but I just didn't really have any concept of what Christianity really was. But I was a weird kid, and around like 5th grade, I started asking questions like, why am I alive? And what is life for? And what is the purpose of all of this? And things like that. And my mom has always been really encouraging of research and, really just looking, if you have questions, going and finding the answers. And so I ended up over 7th and 8th grade, ended up reading Thomas Aquinas' Summa, and just thought, yeah, I mean, that seems logical and true. I mean, because like what 7th grader is going to have other logical skills to refute any of that? I just like, this was logical.
Most of my 7th and 8th graders that I teach have moved way beyond Aquinas, but
Yeah, I was behind.
That's a joke.
Yeah, no. But yeah, it was just like, okay, this is true. And so I just decided that, okay, I think this is true. And if I think this is true, that means I'm a Christian because I think this is true. Right. And then, and then I kind of waffled, didn't go to church. Like I still didn't go to church, growing up. So it just was kind of like me and my Bible reading through the lens of Aquinas. And just, I was kind of excited originally, and then the excitement of being a teenager and all of high school and things like that kind of turned that off. But I really wanted to kind of give it a shot, and so then when I was 18, I moved kind of across the country, halfway across the country, to join like an intentional Christian community, and just kind of lived from there. But I wasn't really like, I did a lot of Christian things, but I wasn't really like some of it I just did to be good. And some of it I did to like be rebellious because my parents believed one thing, and therefore I was 100% going to believe a different thing. And
you're being rebellious by being a Christian, rebelling against your agnostic parents. That's hilarious.
But some of it was terrible. Some of it was just like really obnoxious. Just when I think back to the things that I did that were just like, I think there was a point in my life where if my parents had been like, the sky is blue, I would have been like, it's green, and I don't know why you have to be like this. But instead of saying those things, I was just saying like Christian things kind of in that tone, which is so cringe.
Yeah. You're one of the few friends I have who became a Christian because of apologetics. And so I want to kind of go there a little bit. When I first started podcasting, I had an apologetics podcast where I debated atheists and hosted debates between Christians and atheists primarily. And I got into apologetics for a while, and then I kind of got tired of it. mostly because I wasn't doing the greatest job defending the faith. It seemed like at least American atheists, if they grew up Christian, have really thought through why they're an atheist, more so than Christians, probably because they're a minority ideology and it feels like they need to defend themselves more. But also, I kind of felt like people just sort of choose what they want to believe and then find the apologist or the atheist who will make them feel intelligent with what they want to believe. And I got a little cynical about it, but what do you think is the role of apologetics? Obviously, like it had an important role in your life, but do you think that it really is relevant in the postmodern area?
I think it can be. I think one of the things that I love about Aquinas is that his goal is to, or at least as it seems, his goal is to find truth and then identify that and talk about it, as opposed to like prove people wrong. And oftentimes apologetics in the postmodern era is framed as this is why I'm right and you're wrong, not let's reason our way towards truth together. And that he's really honest about articulating his opponent's opinion. And so I didn't feel like he was like, just making something up that was easily like a straw man setting it up so he could knock him down. I felt like he was really doing, being just towards his opponent's feelings and their opinions, and then reasoning with them in a way that made sense.
What were the objections to Christianity that he was dealing with back then? Because I'm sure they're different than what apologists are dealing with now.
In the Summa, he isn't necessarily dealing with just one objection. Just every principle he sets forward, he says, here are like 7 objections you could possibly have to this. And then he kind of he gives his position and then addresses each of those objections.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Some of them were things like, how can you know that God exists? He's kind of well known for his 5 proofs for the existence of God. And things like that. And the same questions everyone still has, like, how can there be a God if there's still evil in the world? What's the role of, like, how can someone come to know this? What does it mean if one person says they know this and another person says that they don't? And how does that look?
So I assume that's why you became Catholic then, was because you were a disciple of Aquinas?
I think I was kind of on that road already. Mm-hmm. A lot of it was just that in the circles that I ended up in, I saw people doing really good work, but they weren't necessarily doing it. Like, it felt like Jesus was like a tack-on add-on at the end. And so there wasn't really like a theological framework and foundation. And even like the denomination that we were under, who will remain unnamed because they're wonderful, like even in the way that they talk about what they believe, they don't have a statement of faith. They have a series of affirmations, ostensibly because a statement of faith would be too strong.
So this was the first Christian group that you joined?
Yeah. So
within the Catholic tradition?
Not within the Catholic tradition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was just kind of broadly Christian, and I guess you're just evangelical if you're not anything. I don't know. But then I just was kind of like, well, we could be doing all of these things and not saying Jesus too. And just there felt like there was a little bit of dissonance there. And so then I made my way into the Catholic Church, but I was probably leaning that way the whole time because Aquinas.
So other than Aquinas, what was it that attracted you toward Catholicism?
I liked the historic link. Sometimes it felt like people were unnecessarily reinventing the wheel. Mm-hmm. I liked the idea of unity. And I just liked that they had, like, even today, like, like they have like the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that they were able to like reason their way through their faith. Because I often felt a lot of people would talk about faith as this leap you take. And in some ways it is. But it often felt like people would talk about faith in a way that was like, well, just turn your brain off and then just jump off this cliff. Mm-hmm. And that didn't seem like why God gave us brains. And so there was that. And then the kind of the once saved, always saved kind of debate going on. I just couldn't see that in scripture and had not grown up thinking that once saved, always saved was concept that made sense. Like God would force you into heaven because you'd accidentally said some contractual prayer when you were 6, regardless of your desires. And the Catholic Church did not teach once saved, always saved. And so those are probably the main.
I love the way you put that, describing once saved, always saved, which perhaps isn't quite as charitable to some Baptists, but that makes a lot of sense to me. God would accidentally let you into heaven because of a contractual prayer that you unintentionally said.
So you're no longer Catholic, but what are some of the things that you still appreciate about the Catholic tradition that maybe we could learn from?
The idea that you can disagree with people, specifically in secondary issues, and that they can still, like, you can still approach the communion table with them, that they don't become less Christian because they're less you. And yeah, I guess I also have a love for just that idea that like the transcendentals, that they have a role in bringing us to the Lord. And
by transcendentals, you mean the Eucharist, and am I right? That's a sacrament. Sorry, what's a transcendental?
I mean truth, goodness, beauty, and unity.
Okay. Sorry, very un-Catholic question to ask. Drew, did you know what the transcendentals were?
I was thinking something about Ralph Waldo Emerson, to be honest. So we're pretty much non-Catholic here. Can you say that again? Tell us. So the transcendentals, goodness, beauty, something, and what you appreciate about that again? So
the transcendentals are truth, goodness, beauty, and then unity. And they are, so philosophically, they are concepts that can exist separately. You can't have red without something being red, but you can talk about beauty. And because it kind of transcends like its limitation to a physical object. And those transcendentals, when we see them, draw us towards the Lord. And I just think that the focus on that can reflect the fact that, because sometimes in non-liturgical settings, you kind of lose the idea that like God made us as embodied people, and that he gave us our senses, and that those senses can draw us towards him, and we don't just have to like ignore them for like austere, settings. And so I appreciate the focus on the transcendentals.
So fleshing that out a bit, because this really is interesting to me. I have an uncle, an uncle, except he's divorced now, so I don't know. Anyhow, an ex-uncle by marriage. He and I talked. He was a devout conservative Catholic, and he and I went back and forth quite a bit. And that's one thing that he emphasized, like the evangelical, Protestant, even Anabaptist tradition tend to be very ugly in their worship. Like aesthetically speaking, very, very ugly, very unartistic, very uncreative. Is that some of what you're talking about?
Yeah, some of that definitely comes up in art and in things like that, but some of it also just comes up in the way that we talk about things. I think there's something to be said for being practical. I like things that are practical and that you can do something with and you don't just think about forever. But that said, the practical doesn't replace the need for like things that are inspiring and beautiful and just exist because they're beautiful, and that we talk about just because they're glorious and majestic. So yeah.
I want to drill into this a little bit, Titus, if that's okay, because this is something that's really fascinating to me. A lot of more plain circles are, plain, right? And this idea of something existing just for beauty. Well, nature is beautiful, and we can appreciate the beauty of nature, but beyond that, acknowledging the beauty of a human being or something artistic is a bit of a stretch for a lot of people. I don't know if that's fair, Titus, but
yeah.
What does that look like?
Something there.
Go ahead. What does that look like for you, Kimberly? And we'll get to where you are now in your walk of faith and your ecclesiology and stuff. But what does that pursuit of transcendental beauty look like for you now?
What does it look like? So I think it does involve
No
a lot of
pun
nature.
intended.
I think God. Oh,
I said no pun intended. What does it look like? All right, go on.
Titus. He's a dad.
I am a dad.
Yeah, I think it looks like. So for me, it often looks like nature. For me, it often looks like nature. Sometimes it looks like music. Sometimes I just think that like God gives us so many opportunities to see things that are beautiful that you miss out on those if being plain becomes the focus, as opposed to just a natural outworking of simplicity. Then I think sometimes you end up with things that feel almost intentionally ugly. Whereas simplicity doesn't require ugliness. It just requires like a right ordering of your priorities.
I really like that. I think that simplicity is a better word than plainness, because if we are living a simple life, a life that's not cluttered by tons of distracting media or a lot of junk in your house that takes your attention, then you're actually able to enjoy the transcendental, the transcending, whatever that thing is. You're able to enjoy that a lot more. And I think with conservative Anabaptists, I think the word plain is more referring to adorning our person with like a ton of jewelry. And you could even say that takes away from the natural beauty of what an image of God is. So I don't think that anything about simplicity, or even if you want to use the word plainness, needs to take away from that. But it often does, like Drew's talking about.
So are there other things? I think for me, sometimes as not a terribly artistic person, I can use plainness or simplicity as an excuse for laziness, aesthetic laziness. But are there other things from the Catholic tradition that you appreciated, or that you sometimes wish as Protestants or evangelicals or whatever we are, third wing of the Reformation?
We are not Protestants or evangelicals.
Well, that's another conversation. But other things that you would look and say, boy, don't throw this out with the bathwater.
I'm trying to think. I think a focus on the historic faith, and the idea that there's a cloud of witnesses and we're not the only ones. And Anabaptists somewhat have this, and other traditions, like a lot of other traditions, have it as well, but maybe not as well fleshed out. But there's like a strong hagiographical like tradition within the Catholic Church that kind of, because sometimes when you're trying to follow Jesus, it can get really nebulous. In some ways, I mean, he has clear commands, we can follow those, but sometimes you're like, okay, like what does it look like to love my enemies? And the Catholic Church has examples of like, what does it look like to give up all that I have for the poor? And you can look at like Dorothy Day, and you can look at Saint Francis of Assisi, and what does it look like to love the Lord with all my mind? And you can look at Saint Ambrose, and you can look at Saint Thomas Aquinas, and all of those people, and what does it look like to follow the Lord as just like a cool 20-something-year-old, and like, oh look, there's Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati.
So basically, we need to trade the canonization of saints for Martyr's Mirror and the Ante-Nicene Fathers.
Yeah, but in a way that's based in story. Like, because sometimes those like even things like the story of, I think everyone knows the story of Dirk Willems. I think everyone comes across that at some point. But that's so memorable because it's told as a story, and a lot of the way that in non-Catholic circles I see people talk about following the Lord as kind of as an idea, or in this like almost hero way, but it's not like this person came from this, went to this, like look at this, like this is what it looks like for this person to follow the Lord, and having like such a myriad of examples, so we all realize we don't all need to be Dirk Willems, but we need to be like Christ, and that there are other people who have gone before and can give a good example of how to be like Christ.
So now you're kingdom-ish, Anabaptist-ish. I don't know how you identify, but you're more in that stream. So how did you first discover that theology, and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned that I wasn't really following the Lord seriously until probably like 3 years ago. Um, and yeah, so I just started following the Lord and was trying to really just be faithful to the things that Jesus was saying, and pursue holiness for its own sake. And just kind of started running up against really hard teachings of Jesus, like, turn the other cheek was a big one. And just feeling like in the circles I was in, I was seeing people spend a lot more time explaining why we didn't need to do those things. And it felt like if we would just put the same energy into explaining what that we were putting into explaining why we didn't need to do them into doing them, like how great would we be? And so a lot of it I like formed. I Google searched, what if Jesus really meant every word he said, which means that you immediately come up to Dean Taylor. I don't know that you could put in a search more directly to Dean.
He's really got the
than that.
SEO cornered on that search term.
Yeah. And so then just started listening to like, oh, like this is amazing. Like he's talking about like he's saying you can actually do this, and other people are saying you can actually do this. That combined with some other things that I was wrestling with theologically, like some sacraments, like what is that sacrament? Like confirmation and questions about baptism. Those things were kind of coming up right at the same time, and so then it just felt like a lot of things had built up, and so I needed to make a switch, and I wasn't faithfully agreeing with the Catholic Church anymore on some really important.
So it really was a disagreement with the theology and practice of the Catholic Church that made you want to look for something more.
Yeah, so definitely in combination. I don't know that theologically I was at a point where I would have necessarily left, or that alone, or that practice-wise I was at a point where I would have left. But I think the combination of those two things kind of made me want to take that step.
So you start reading or listening to messages from people like Dean Taylor, and that drew you to the third wing of the Reformation, and away from, like, why didn't you just jump back into the evangelical setting?
Because there was a reason that I'd come out of that. And so it didn't feel like I would really accomplish anything by just going back to it. Like a lot of the issues weren't necessarily resolved within the evangelical world either.
Gotcha.
So now you're headed to the Mecca of Kingdom Christianity. You got a job at Sattler College. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what you'll be doing there? That's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So I'm an admissions counselor at Sattler College, and yeah, I'm excited. So it came about, I think, through kind of, they were looking for someone. I was interested in using my marketing skills because originally I had gone to school for marketing with a very specific plan. And then when I left the Catholic Church, that plan kind of dissipated. And so then I was kind of like, well, what do I do? I don't just want to like use this degree to like make money. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't why I had gone to school. And so this job opening came up. I applied. Well, I was told about it and I applied. And now I get to just like talk to people about Sattler and talk about what their dreams are and see if Sattler would be a good fit for them. And I love it. Yeah. And so in June, I'm moving into, as you called it, the Mecca of Kingdom Christianity, and moving to Boston.
Which is really unfortunate because that's right when we're potentially joining your church you're leaving. But oh well, so it goes.
So we kind of jumped from talking about, I said the third wing of the Reformation, Anabaptism, to talking about Sattler College and Kingdom Christianity and some of the work that people like Vinny Kuruvilla are doing with Followers of the Way. What are the distinctions? Like, why didn't you just join a Mennonite church? What are the distinctions between, say, the Anabaptist tradition in North America and what you're seeing in what Titus is calling Kingdom Christianity?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things. for me specifically. So I think theologically, there's communion is a big deal for me. It's also one of the main reasons that I became Catholic. Reading John 6, it feels like people often take all of the rest of Jesus's words very literally, and then they get to the part where he talks about his body and blood, and they're like, "Oh, not like that. That's definitely a symbol." So that was a big deal for me. A focus on community is also important because in some ways there is unity within the Catholic Church, but in other ways there's not. Where just what does it look like to be a community? Which a lot of Anabaptist communities do community well, but maybe not in quite the way that I was envisioning. I feel like there's definitely other differences. Communion is definitely the one that stands out to me as the most important.
And
yeah,
Christmas.
I'm not looking. Christmas.
That would have come afterwards.
I'm not looking to like, my wife is Mennonite, and I have a whole bunch of appreciation for the Anabaptist Mennonite tradition. But as longtime listeners to this short-lived podcast know, it's something of a journey that I'm on, trying to understand, is there a tradition or a group that I can kind of fit in with, having spent a lot of time in a Mennonite context, grown up Church of Christ, and I'm kind of left like, there's some really cool things about something like Followers of the Way, really cool things about like their community focus. The community focus that I see, it's not so much of a let's get together and can applesauce, which is awesome. It's more of let's have community, discipleship focused community, where we're not just being a supportive community, which is important, but we're being a supportive community toward kingdom building and making each other more like Jesus. So really I've appreciated, and even in my own church, have integrated some of that into our church. But then coming from a different tradition, the whole sacramentalist, eating my flesh stuff, I still really struggle with that. So I'm not looking to throw anybody under the bus. I'm sitting here trying to understand some of those differences, and I've appreciated in just the interactions we've had over the last couple months, Kimberly, your ability to think clearly about some of those things. So now I wait awkwardly because I didn't really actually ask a question.
No, your audio kind of was cutting out. I don't think in the actual edited version it will be that way because it uploads directly to the file. But at least for me, you're kind of cutting out a lot.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's that way for Kimberly
I didn't hear
or not.
your question.
I can hardly hear what you're saying a lot of the time. Is your internet bad?
I mean, you guys look great on video to me.
Okay, 31 and 38. We'll have to do editing. No, it was this way for Merle's. It was this way for Merle's episode too. Like I think it's uploading to the cloud fine. Like I think it's going to be fine. It's really hard to make out what you're saying. It's just crackly.
Yeah.
So, anyways, you said something about struggling with sacramentalism, which is fine. You know, the Jews that Jesus was speaking to struggled with it too.
Yep.
In fact, a lot of them left, and Jesus was like, "Will you leave too?" Yeah. So, Drew, will you leave? All right, that should have been on the. That should be in the real version of the show. It's such a good roast. Let me see. What else were we going to talk about? Okay, let's just go to the last question unless you wanted to hit on that anymore, Kimberly.
No, I was just going to say something about the ethnic constraints of Anabaptism as well, but
okay, do that. We'll have a little pause and you can just jump right into that. Go ahead.
So I also think that just entering kind of more kingdom circles, that Anabaptism seems to have some like ethnic constraints and like cultural constraints that I just didn't necessarily feel the need to adopt. And for some of those things, it wasn't necessarily that I was against adopting those for myself. I just wasn't sure how I would be able to share that with like my friends that I have or friends that I will like to make without kind of, importing all of these things into them. And for some people, that's not an issue, but it just felt like it would be really limiting and that it would be difficult to kind of be like fully integrated into the life and culture, as it were, of the church.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely know what you're talking about there, having grown up in the Vichy church my whole life.
And for a lot of us,
makes
it's
sense.
not so much that we can't do those things for ourselves, adopt an ethnic or cultural tradition that's maybe not something you grew up with. But for me, at least, and others I've talked with, it has more to do with, is this actually a barrier I want to place on others? Sure, I could be okay with it, like say a cape dress or a plain coat or something, but is that really where what I want to require of others?
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely was kind of some of it was a little bit personal. But there definitely was a sense that like I like, even if I was fine with it, for me, I couldn't, I wasn't entirely comfortable saying I was going to require this of other people. And I felt like it would be hard for me to like evangelize effectively.
Yeah. So what are some of your like hopes and dreams for your life moving forward? Do you have any dreams beyond Sattler, or do you think you'll be at that job for a long time?
Yeah, so I don't know that they're necessarily in conflict with each other. So yeah, I'm really loving what I'm doing at Sattler, even more than I thought I would. So it definitely feels like a long-term thing. Other than that, we were just, as a congregation, we actually just kind of went through and kind of set some goals for ourselves personally and just spent some time kind of praying through that. And I am really passionate about food insecurity within the United States and basic literacy. So I'm really hoping like, I just signed up to like learn how to become like a certified tutor. But also, I'm really hoping to do something that like in 10 years, I'd like to have something going in which somehow like I was distributing 200 plus meals each week to families or individuals in some context who are currently not being served by anything that exists. So we'll see what happens with that. That doesn't necessarily need to be a full-time thing, but it's definitely something I'd like to make more tangible steps towards.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Often when we think about caring for the poor, we think globally of countries that are not as wealthy as America, but I know there is definitely needs locally here too. So that's really cool to hear your vision for that.
And the literacy.
Anyways, any final words here before we wrap up? Anybody?
I really am excited by your vision for literacy. That's something near and dear to my heart, having spent many years working in ESL programs internationally, and now teaching English and working in after school and such. It's a real need and a real way to serve people. So all the best in that vision.
Thanks.
On that rosy note, we will sign off. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks Kimberly for joining us. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with your friends. And we will see you next time.
Take care.